Well, good morning. Great to see everyone today. We're going to just review the essential points of Chapter 3. Chapter 3 has a lot of really important details that you will use the rest of your life in language teaching, or actually any type of teaching. Also, a lot of this comes up on your content specialty test, your New York State ESOL grades K through 12 content specialty test that all of you will be taking. So I want to make sure that you really know what you need to know in this chapter. Okay, so first of all, let's begin with key terms. You need to know all of these key terms. We're going to talk about them here in the next few minutes, but if you haven't made your flashcards, get on it. All of you need flashcards for these key terms in every chapter. There's nothing in those key terms that won't be important for your teaching career and to follow through on certification. So let's go through in fact, every single thing in this chapter we covered in the linguistics course. So for all of you, it should have been pretty easy to understand and to review. It was basically a review. And even you, Colleen, we talked about most of this in our last chapter in our text, so it should have been pretty comfortable for you as well. But here on page 48, 49, I want to talk a little bit about first language acquisition theory. There's a number of theories, but now the school of thought really follows Chomsky's research and the idea that language acquisition is an innate ability, that we have a language acquisition device, an LAD. We're not really sure what it is, but it's there and it enables everyone to learn language. And it's this idea of universal grammar. It doesn't matter if you put a baby in Korea, in Russia, oops, my light went off, or in the US, in Mexico, all humans will acquire language, and we acquire them in particular stages, and it's something that it's innate. And even though it's still a hypothesis and a theory, this is what most people follow. I hope it's not too dark. It's actually, let me see if I can get the light on. Too dark for me to check my book. Hold on a second. All right, waving my hands didn't work. I had to actually get up and turn it on. Okay, so make sure that you're just refamiliarize yourself with Chomsky. And that's second language acquisition. We feel the same thing, that it's more natural and more quicker. And you all heard Krashen's video where he even said, and this was 30 years ago, don't even bother with grammar, that we really learn, even in SLA, second language acquisition, that we learn by acquiring rather than teaching and learning model. It's the acquisition model. All right, also in the approaches to teaching, we have the cognitive approaches, and we have behaviorists, the empirists. And the empirists and behaviorists, just think of behaviorism and Skinner, are those that really feel that to learn a language, we have to teach the language, and they're about learning it. So you think about methods like grammar translation, ALM, and theorists who really follow the cognitivists path. This is like Chomsky and Krashen and Halliday. Say, you know what, this is language acquisition. We're not learning it, we're acquiring it. And there's a lot of, again, hypotheses under there, but the important ones, of course, are highlighted here on page 50. That one, for language acquisition, that we're more efficient in our SLA when we acquire rather than learn. And this is how we acquire our L1. We have the critical period hypothesis, and this is the idea that we learn our language, our L1. You can think of the story of Jeannie. If we're not exposed to language by this period of puberty, and an L2, if we want to learn an L2 with native-like fluency, we really need to begin that before that critical period closes. We want to make sure that we've been exposed to those sounds and our brain's still fluid in those areas. Critical period hypothesis hasn't been proven, but it's unusual, not rare, but it's unusual that someone who's learning a second language acquires native-like fluency if they've been introduced to that second language after puberty, after the age of 13, 14. It's really tough to get that native-like fluency. That's critical period hypothesis. Let's see, acquisition learning, natural order hypothesis. We know that we acquire language in a predictable order. We acquire present tense. Then we we inflect the verb, and there's the order for that. Monitor hypothesis. This is the same idea. We monitor our own production. We might not know why something sounds right, but we understand why it sounds right. We just talked about this yesterday, I think, in one of the classes. For example, I'm late, I had to get on the bus. I'm late, I had to get on the car. You don't get on a car, you get in a car, you get on a bus. And this is the idea of monitor hypothesis. We're not quite sure why it's this way or that way, but as we listen and subconsciously monitor ourselves and others, we learn those patterns. Just like in your L1, we don't learn adjective order. If I have a apple with a label, describe this using adjectives. This is a small red apple. You wouldn't say this is a red small apple. In our L2 or L3, we have to learn adjective order. Small red cold apple, a cold red small apple, small cold red apple. Adjective order matters. In our L1, we acquire adjective order, and that's through this monitor hypothesis. Input, output. This is input hypothesis. Gosh, I have something on my hand. We're going to talk about this, or you've already heard about it in the feedback. Input hypothesis. We need comprehensible input. Flashcards are great if you're an adult and you have that cognitive development and you're a visual learner. But you need to have introduced, I need to introduce the text first. I can't be giving you vocabulary if you have no idea what it relates to. So we need comprehensible input to make that learning meaningful. The same thing is comprehensible output here. Oh, then it's the effective filter. We'll get to comprehensible output. I think it's coming up next. Okay, we talked about the effective domain. We did this in the 185 class. Everyone, maybe Colleen, you haven't had it. The effective domain, we talked about this. A kid comes in hungry and he's in 4th grade. Is he going to want to sit there and listen to, you know, the state flags? No. You're cold, you can't focus. You have a 3rd grader who has to pee. It's like, I had to pee. And the teacher says, sorry, you've already gone. But I had to pee. Sorry, you've already gone. I had to go. He's not going to focus. It's the same thing in language learners. And we see it, especially as we get older. When you're in your L2 classroom and you're learning your language and the professor wants you to speak out loud and you have to say something. And you know, like my French stinks. And I think I say, oh, bonjour, comment allez-vous? And the teacher says, no, it's bonjour, comment allez-vous? And that's full. Sometimes you feel embarrassed and you have a little bit of shame and you're humiliated. That's the effective filter. We want to make sure that we address the effective filter, any of those issues, to make sure that the student's open and ready for learning. This isn't just a language teaching issue. This is an all-over education issue. Interaction hypothesis. We see this through Schumann. We see this through sociocultural theory, that we understand that social interaction, even these are all hypotheses, it's shocking. We know this makes a difference. It's so challenging to learn language all by yourself. Okay, comprehensible output. This, again, is something that's important. It's what showed up in the video. We need our students to talk. We need our students to talk. They need to produce language. Just like in your L2 classrooms right now, when you're studying that language. As hard as it is, and maybe embarrassing, we have to sit there and we have to talk with a partner and we have to make that output. If we don't have comprehensible output, we're missing a huge part of our language learning experience. And this is often what we miss in language teaching. Someone will look at a lesson plan and they'll say, oh, that was fabulous. The teacher is so well managed. The class students are so quiet. That's not what we want. And I'll give you a quick story, and I think I just shared this with my linguistics class. I remember one time I was teaching ESL, and it was like middle school, could have even been high school. It was probably a middle. I think about this. It was middle school, and I had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students all in one classroom because I grouped them as proficient with proficiency levels. So it was great. And the principal came and interrupted my class and knocked on my door. And my students were all talking and doing all this stuff. And he said, I just want to take a minute and talk to you because I wanted to come down and see for myself that other teachers said that your class is just really noisy, that there seems just to be a lot of talking going on and it's just really noisy. And I looked at him and I said, it's a language teaching class. I'm teaching these students to speak English. I want them to talk. And he looked at me and literally he went like this. He went, oh, and walked away. So this is something we want to remember and you want to defend. We want our students to talk. Our class should be noisy. It doesn't need to be disorganized. It doesn't need to be misbehavior, but we want that output. So this is important. This is going to come up on your CST, that we need students to participate and talk. Noticing hypothesis, it's funny. Yeah, you're not going to need to know that. Possibility input processing model. Okay, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's move on to page 55, transfer from first language to second language. This, again, is important. When we're talking about our older EAL students, English as an additional language, I really want to get used to that term because you'll need that for EdTPA. EAL, we understand that there's value in transfer. So what this means is a student who's coming in, and let's say he's coming in 4th and 5th grade, he doesn't need to be taught content in his L1 in order to understand. He can transfer over the idea of math facts. He can transfer over the idea of cognitive skills like reading and writing. And the older the student is and the more knowledgeable he is in his L1, the more he can transfer over to his L2, which makes sense. Even though we're teaching content and language at the same time, we don't have to spend time in teaching concepts that that student has already grasped. So this is the idea that we want to honor that L1 and what he has already understood. So if they have literacy skills, they can read and write in their L1, that's great. You've gone a long way. You don't need to teach them those literacy skills. You might have to teach them pronunciation here and there, but we don't have to go back and teach them literacy skills. So we want to remember that we have, if they've developed those skills, to recognize them and utilize them, and they can apply that to their L2. So make sure that you've read and understand that section on page 55. So sociocultural perspectives. Okay, so now we're going back to Halliday. We're going back to Schumann. Anyone that we're going back to Vygotsky, even Krashen. Socioculture. We need to make sure that we recognize our students' heritage, culture, or background, and that their learning is in a social environment, just like it sounds. We have content language, we have communicative language teaching, CLT, and CBI, content-based instruction. You all know this. You know this through so many different terms. Communicative language teaching is this idea that we're teaching student-centered. We are teaching content and language at the same time, and that it's a sociocultural perspective. We recognize and invite our students' L1s and their culture along with those language skills. Make sure you understand both those terms and you know those acronyms. We're reintroduced to Vygotsky, and we understand that Vygotsky's idea of zone of proximal development. We saw this in Krashen. Did they talk about Krashen's +1? Yes, Krashen's input +1. This is kind of the same idea. Krashen's input +1 is for language, and the idea that when we teach language, we want to give them just enough challenge for them to want to continue learning. And Vygotsky is the same idea, but it's with knowledge, with content knowledge. That ZBD, that zone